Everyone, welcome to another video, and today for this month's video I thought it would be interesting to dive into something that is animation related. Animation is a art form that I find to be really close to my heart, hoping to yours as well. I think oftentimes animation gets labeled as kid stuff. It gets labeled as, not as inventive or as creative as live action, which I find to be hilarious because not only is animation taking on a whole new realm by focusing on adult entertainment, but it has grown, I think, as far as influence, and I think people are starting to see it more as something that's for everyone and can appease a variety of different audiences. It just depends on what you're into. But in particular for this video, I'll be focusing more on the trends within children's animation, in particular children's entertainment. And I'll also be discussing the film Moana, which is one of Disney's most recent and very highly anticipated, I would say, projects within the past year. And I did get a chance to see it actually on Netflix. It finally came out there, so I was able to sit down and actually view it. And I'll sort of talk about the film, and then I will also talk about a little bit in regards to where the trends are going within children's entertainment, in particular with animation, and where the ball is sort of being thrown, and like what's the kind of feeling as far as these kinds of films are concerned, because animation has changed a lot within the past even 10 years, because we've seen animation transition completely from 2D to 3D. I would say that the 2D still survives within television, but as far as when you're talking movies, the 3D animation has, I think, completely taken over. And I think that has to do with a variety of factors. One being that people are a lot more into technology than I think they were in the past. And that has caused, I think, a lot of people to be really invested into computers and really exploring that kind of art form and what can be done with it, because again, it's a new kind of trend, and people are not, I think, as invested as into the painting of, two-dimensional work as much anymore, and are more interested in making things through the lens of a computer nowadays. So I can definitely see why it has been trending this way, and I think it's kind of unfortunate because I do find myself really enjoying the 2D animation. I think that it's a very interesting art form. I was hoping that they would be able to exist side by side, but it looks like that's no longer the case, unfortunately, at least within the movie space. So, first things first, let's talk about Moana. Moana, I thought was a okay film. I didn't think it was spectacular. It didn't really blow me away, um, but I didn't find myself being annoyed by it or irritated at what it was trying to say, compared to some other Disney Pixar related films like Brave or Frozen that have come out recently. And I'll kind of explain my reasoning behind this. But in case you don't know the story, or what Moana is about, it basically takes place around, I think you could say, um, more so ancient Polynesian times. So when the Polynesian people were exploring different islands and settling in different habitats, or just developing different villages, and then eventually moving on to another island and developing a settlement there. So they were kind of just explorers, and the movie highlights this really well in explaining how the culture kind of operates. And they were really big on exploring the ocean in particular because, again, they were island hoppers. So Moana in particular is the daughter of a chieftain, um, who has sort of an obligation to her people because she is the next in line to kind of be in charge. But at the same time, she feels that there's this kind of destiny being bestowed onto her, and hence she has to go out into the ocean and have a sort of adventure. And you'll sort of see what that adventure ends up entailing and what kind of obstacles are thrown not only on Moana but on her people as well. And you'll see how eventually she comes into contact with Maui, who is considered to be a god to the Polynesian culture, I guess. Um, and you'll sort of see how he ends up playing a role with Moana as far as exploring and taking that little adventure with her. Um, so that's the movie within and of itself, as far as in a nutshell, without really kind of exposing too much as far as what exactly happens. Um, I think a lot of what entails this movie of being okay, as far as my opinion is concerned, is that it doesn't, I think, take too many risks. It tries to play it as safe as possible, um, and doesn't try to do anything too new. Um, there has been, I think, a complaint with this movie, and I think it is somewhat justified in the fact that there are a lot of cliche elements within it. I would say though that the cliche aspects didn't bother me as much because I don't think they really ended up being the major focus of the movie. They just kind of ended up being inserted in there as kind of plot devices. Like you'll see within the beginning how Moana wants to go out and explore the ocean, but her dad is completely against it. And they sort of give a little bit of context as to why that is. Um, but it doesn't become like a major part of the movie to where she has this bad relationship with her father, and they explore that whole BS angle that we've seen time and time and time again within Disney films. So I'm kind of happy that they just used it as a plot device and not as anything else. So again, I understand that the cliches are there, and I understand that they are using them, but at the same time, I think they use them in a more uh, less glaring and less influential way than I've seen in some other previous recent Disney works like Frozen and Brave, for example. Um, Also, I will say that the characters within and of themselves are okay. Like, Moana is kind of the typical I mean, she is kind of the typical Disney princess. Wants to have adventure, wants to go out and see the world, similar things that we've seen in the past. And at the same time, I think they do try to make her a little bit more spunky and a little bit more different, which I think, again, it just makes her a good character. It just doesn't make her a standout to me. Um, and it's kind of the same with Maui. Maui, you'll kind of see, has kind of a similar personality to Flynn Rider in that he's very egotistical and he tries to poke fun at things, and he does things that are wrong, but at the end of the day, he really does have a good heart. So it's that kind of character that we've seen before, and not somebody that we've kind of uh, it's something that we've already, I think, if you've seen a lot of Disney movies, have familiarized yourselves with probably already. Like, these characters don't bring too much new to the table, but they still try to provide something, and I think that's what makes this a good movie as opposed to Brave and Frozen, who I think rely too heavily on the cliches and don't have good plot development as far as between the characters. Because at least with Moana and Maui, there's a significant amount of time devoted to them being together and actually talking about things, as opposed to in Frozen, where there is hardly any time devoted between Anna and Elsa actually interacting with each other. So that within and of itself already, I think, makes it a stronger film than that film. And it does, I think, a lot of things right. I just think it doesn't push the envelope. It doesn't try to go that extra step. And I think there's definitely a reason for that. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Disney is now a much bigger company than it was in the past. I mean, even when Walt was alive, I mean, it was pretty big, but it never grew to this corporate uh, monstrosity. And I mean by monstrosity, like it's just so gigantically big. I mean, they got Marvel recently. They've got Star Wars, Lucasfilms now. They have pretty much everything under their belt. They've got everything under their skin now. And as a huge, gigantic organization that has so much influence and so much um, marketability to people, I think it's definitely safe to say that it's understandable why these kinds of movies would be coming out. The good movies, not the great movies, not the movies that we've seen in the past, but again, they're not terrible. You know, they try to put in some effort into them. Um, but at the same time, again, I think they're trying to play it as safe as possible. Um, and I think that that's something that can be used as an advantage, but then at the same time, I think it's a disadvantage. It's kind of like the saying goes, like if you try to appeal to so many people, you're not gonna appeal to anybody. And this is, I think, a lot of what's maybe the problems with this movie um, is, and I think a lot of people are seeing it in the fact that Disney is kind of trying to play the safe card with every movie they come out with now, because I think they don't want to lose that influence that they've had, and don't want to push too much of the envelope so that it deters people away, and that it just appeals to a certain demographic and mass market. And I think it's also a sense too that they feel like they don't really need to try that hard. You know, they have everything that they could possibly want as an entertainment organization. They have everybody. Like they pretty much, you know how Coke and McDonald's used to be like the big thing, and they thought that Coke and McDonald's were gonna maybe like rule the world or something because they had just so much influence. I think this is a Disney now, because Disney has so many companies now that they've bought out, and they're making entertainment out of, whether it be Marvel, whether it be um, Star Wars now. I mean, they have everything that they could possibly want. And I think the idea of making things that are just standard is the kind of protocol. Make it standard. It doesn't need to be fantastic. It doesn't need to blow people away. It just needs to satisfy them. That's all we need to do as a company, because we are on top of our A game again. Um, Pixar, from what I've heard last time, they're making a Cars 3. Like that just does not make sense to me. Nothing original coming out of that area. DreamWorks, I think, has also been struggling. I mean, some of their movies have not been that impressive from what I've seen. So, yeah, Disney's up on top again. They are the kings now of, they're pretty much, I would say definitely they did kind of create themselves a new renaissance, only because the other studios are not trying as hard as they are. Um, and I think once you're on top, you kind of realize you don't need to try as hard, and you don't need to put so much effort into every film. And I will give Moana credit because, it's definitely a new culture that Disney hasn't explored, and it's nice to see them kind of try to expose a little bit of that culture. And you could tell that they did their research and they went to these places and explored the people that were there. There was a genuine amount of effort put into it. It's just that it doesn't kind of go the extra mile, I think, that a lot of their other films have done in the past. And I think it's definitely safe to say, with the trends within animation are concerned, that the reason why that is because they have so much influence already. They have a lot of projects that they're working on, and they can kind of make things a little bit more standard and not push the envelope too much. And I think that's kind of understandable. I mean, sometimes I think even no matter what company it is, no matter what you're making, there's this a point where I think, there's so much influence that you have that you don't really need to try as hard anymore as you did when you started out. And I think that's a very I think kind of clear explanation as far as where animation is going. I will also definitely say, as far as Moana is concerned, I did appreciate that Moana didn't um, try to shove the gender politics down my throat. I really appreciated that. I say props to Disney for doing that. None of this like, let's talk about marriage now. It's like, no, no, you just need a girl going on an adventure. That's all you need. Like, I kind of glad they simplified it that way. They didn't make it this convoluted, ridiculous thing where we have to now talk about marriage and we have to kind of have a big debate about, whether it's right to, you know, whether marriage is a good or bad thing, and whether, let's explore this constantly and just jam it down your throat because you haven't gotten it enough already. So thank you, Moana, and your creators for not shoving that bits and pieces of gender politics down our throats and just focused on a girl who was going on an adventure. That's all this movie needed, and it's what it provided, and I was satisfied with it. But again, satisfaction is not the same as being kind of blown away or taken away, as I was in the past. And again, this might be a nostalgic factor too. I totally understand that there is maybe some bias that I have as far as older Disney films because I really genuinely grew up with them and I thought that they really explored something within my childhood and I was able to learn a lot of different things from these films. And a lot of these films now, although I do definitely learn stuff from them, I don't think they have the power or the emotional investment that I think was exposed more clearly in their older material. So, but I would definitely recommend Moana to people who have not seen it, and kind of form your own conclusion. Again, I think also the fact that the songs are not getting as good as they used to, is another thing that has made kind of Disney kind of lower the bar as far as songwriting is concerned and just make it standard. Everything has to be kind of like standard now. We can't screw up, but then at the same time um, we can't try to push the table too much. We can't try to mess with things. So that's really where I think animation's headed. And on the one hand, it could be a good thing because at least there's a sort of standard going with each film. It's like we're not gonna talk down to you. We're not gonna try to do this or that. We have a standard rule book now that we're going by, and we're just gonna follow this kind of standard rule book. But at the same time, we're not gonna blow you away. We're not gonna go back to how things were. We're gonna just kind of keep things at a certain level. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because I think it goes against what Walt's philosophy was, which was to kind of push the boundaries, was just to kind of move things forward and think of new ideas and things like that. Um, so I could see that as kind of a bad thing, and I hope it doesn't end up biting Disney back. But I will say that overall, I think this is what you're going to see as far as these kinds of films within animation. You're going to see kind of a standard rule kind of uh, book almost, or just a standard way of presenting films, that again is a little bit more I would say formulaic, and again, not as creative or inventive. But at the same time, still doing some interesting, good things, just not as impressive, I would say. Um, and I also appreciate the fact too that this film, I think, didn't get the same amount of exposure as Frozen did. I think it got the exposure that it deserved, and I'm glad that it wasn't overhyped in the same way that Frozen was. So I think that has to do with the box office numbers though, because when you compare Frozen's box office numbers to Moana's, there is a clear reason why Disney didn't push Moana as hard. Um, but at the same time, I hope that that's kind of where it levels out. It just everything just kind of evens out to where there's not too much of a of one film being constantly marketed to. Um, but man, still Frozen is still just shoved in everybody's face. I mean, it's still around everywhere you go. Even when it's summer and it's not even winter right now. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say as far as where animation's going and um, what I thought personally of Moana as a film. Uh, but yeah, I think as far as animation is concerned, as far as children's animation, um, you you definitely are seeing some interesting things, I guess, within the television space. But within the movie space, I think it's kind of clear that Disney is really the top dog again. And they clearly created a little mini renaissance for themselves. And with their recent buyouts of Star Wars and Marvel, I think Marvel was a little bit more ways back, but still, these relatively recent developments, I think, have led them to think that all we have to do with animation is just keep it standard, keep it a certain level of good, but don't push the boundaries too much. We've got other things going on, and there's no reason to overexploit something or try to push push ideas to a new level. And I think that's just how companies operate. And they have their highs and lows where when they're really on top, they don't really think too much about the future and think that the now is great and all we need to do is just keep it at that standard where we have it, um, before maybe we have a little bit of a spiral again. But that's just my personal thoughts and opinions. I'd be more than happy to hear what anybody else has to say in regards to whether it be Moana or where you see animation going. But that's just my honest opinion about this. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. Bye-bye.